Richard Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, left an indelible mark on American politics. His influence extended far beyond his time in office, reshaping the political landscape in ways that continue to resonate today. This exploration will delve into the multifaceted legacy of Nixon and how he fundamentally altered the course of US politics. Nixon's political career began in the post-World War II era, a time of significant change in America. His rise to prominence coincided with the intensification of the Cold War, a factor that would heavily influence his political strategies and decisions. As we examine Nixon's impact, it's crucial to consider the historical context that shaped his approach to politics. One of Nixon's most significant contributions to American politics was his role in the development of the Southern strategy. This approach aimed to appeal to white Southern voters who were traditionally Democratic but felt alienated by their party's support for civil rights. The strategy marked a pivotal shift in party alignments, fundamentally altering the electoral map of the United States. The Southern strategy wasn't just a short-term electoral tactic, it represented a long-term realignment of American politics. By appealing to conservative white Southerners, Nixon helped transform the Republican Party into the dominant political force in the South, a position it largely maintains to this day. This shift had profound implications for policy priorities and political discourse in the country. Nixon's approach to campaigning also revolutionized American politics. He was one of the first politicians to fully embrace television as a medium for reaching voters. His understanding of the power of image in the television age was evident in his famous 1960 debate with John F. Kennedy, and he continued to refine his media strategy throughout his career. The emphasis on image and media management that Nixon pioneered has become a staple of modern political campaigns. His recognition of the importance of controlling the narrative and presenting a carefully crafted public image set the stage for the highly choreographed political communication we see today. Nixon's presidency saw the birth of what would come to be known as the imperial presidency. He centralized power in the executive branch to an unprecedented degree, often bypassing Congress and other checks on his authority. This expansion of presidential power would have lasting consequences for the balance of power in American government. The concept of the imperial presidency didn't end with Nixon. Subsequent presidents, both Republican and Democrat, have built upon this legacy, often pushing the boundaries of executive authority. This trend has led to ongoing debates about the proper role and limits of presidential power in the American system. Nixon's foreign policy approach, particularly his opening to China, marked a significant shift in US global strategy. By engaging with Communist China, Nixon demonstrated a pragmatic approach to foreign relations that prioritized national interests over ideology. This realpolitik approach would influence US foreign policy for decades to come. The opening to China not only changed the dynamics of the Cold War, but also set a precedent for engaging with ideological adversaries. Nixon's willingness to pursue dialogue with communist nations challenged the rigid Cold War mentality and paved the way for more nuanced approaches to international relations. Nixon's détente policy with the Soviet Union further exemplified his pragmatic approach to foreign affairs. By pursuing arms control agreements and increased cooperation with the USSR, Nixon helped reduce Cold War tensions and establish a framework for peaceful coexistence between the superpowers. The legacy of Nixon's foreign policy extends beyond specific initiatives. His approach demonstrated the potential for bold, transformative actions in international relations, inspiring subsequent leaders to pursue their own dramatic foreign policy shifts. On the domestic front, Nixon's presidency saw the implementation of significant environmental protections. The creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and the passage of landmark environmental legislation occurred under his administration, showcasing a bipartisan approach to environmental issues that seems almost unimaginable in today's polarized political climate. Nixon's environmental legacy challenges simplistic political categorizations. Despite being a Republican, he oversaw some of the most significant environmental protections in U.S. history. This aspect of his presidency highlights the complex nature of political ideologies and the potential for cross-partisan cooperation on critical issues. The Nixon administration also implemented significant changes in economic policy. The abandonment of the gold standard and the imposition of wage and price controls marked a departure from traditional Republican economic orthodoxy. These actions demonstrated Nixon's willingness to use government intervention in the economy, an approach that would influence future debates on economic policy. Nixon's economic policies, particularly the end of the Bretton Woods system, had global ramifications. The shift to a floating exchange rate system fundamentally altered the international economic order, showcasing how domestic policy decisions can have far-reaching international consequences. One of Nixon's most controversial legacies is the War on Drugs. Launched in 1971, this initiative dramatically increased the size and presence of federal drug control agencies and pushed for tougher sentencing for drug offenses. The War on Drugs would go on to have profound and lasting effects on American society, particularly in communities of color. The long-term consequences of the War on Drugs illustrate how policy decisions can have unintended and far-reaching impacts. The increase in incarceration rates, the militarization of police forces, and the disproportionate impact on minority communities are all part of the complex legacy of this Nixon-era policy. Nixon's approach to law and order politics, epitomized by his appeal to the silent majority, marked a significant shift in political rhetoric. By positioning himself as the champion of ordinary Americans against a perceived liberal elite, Nixon helped create a new political narrative that continues to resonate in American politics. The concept of the silent majority and the broader law and order approach have become enduring features of American political discourse. This rhetorical strategy has been employed by numerous politicians since Nixon, often as a way to mobilize conservative voters and challenge progressive policies. Nixon's presidency saw significant advancements in civil rights, including the implementation of affirmative action policies. However, these actions were often at odds with his Southern strategy, highlighting the complex and sometimes contradictory nature of his political approach. The tension between Nixon's civil rights policies and his electoral strategy reflects the broader challenges of navigating race in American politics. This dichotomy continues to be a central issue in U.S. political discourse, with debates over racial equality and justice remaining at the forefront of national conversations. Nixon's use of the veto power was particularly noteworthy. He vetoed numerous bills passed by the Democratic-controlled Congress, using this constitutional authority as a tool to shape policy and assert executive power. This approach set a precedent for future presidents in their dealings with oppositional legislatures. The strategic use of veto power demonstrated by Nixon has become a common feature of divided government in the United States. Presidents from both parties have since employed this tactic to influence legislation and negotiate with Congress, often leading to political standoffs and debates about governance. Nixon's presidency saw the implementation of revenue sharing, a policy that directed federal funds to state and local governments. This approach to federalism sought to balance national priorities with local control, a concept that continues to be debated in discussions about the proper relationship between different levels of government. The legacy of Nixon's approach to federalism can be seen in ongoing debates about the role of the federal government in addressing local issues. From education policy to healthcare, questions about the balance between federal oversight and local autonomy remain central to American political discourse. Nixon's new federalism aimed to shift power away from the federal government and towards the states. This philosophy represented a departure from the centralization trends of the New Deal and Great Society eras, influencing subsequent debates about the proper scope of federal power. The concept of new federalism has had a lasting impact on American politics, with many conservative politicians continuing to advocate for a reduced federal role in various policy areas. This ongoing tension between federal and state authority remains a key feature of U.S. political debates. Nixon's presidency coincided with significant social changes in American society, including the women's rights movement and the anti-war movement. His responses to these movements, often characterized by a mix of concession and resistance, reflected the challenges of governing during a time of social upheaval. The way Nixon navigated the social movements of his era provides insights into the challenges of political leadership during times of significant cultural change. His experiences continue to be relevant as contemporary leaders grapple with addressing social movements and evolving cultural norms. Nixon's relationship with the media was notoriously contentious. His adversarial stance towards the press, exemplified by his Vice President Spiro Agnew's attacks on the nattering nabobs of negativism, set a precedent for future politicians' interactions with the media. The antagonistic relationship between Nixon and the press has had lasting implications for political communication in the United States. The tension between political leaders and the media, often framed as a battle over truth and public opinion, remains a defining feature of American politics. Nixon's use of television for political communication was groundbreaking. His ability to speak directly to the American people through televised addresses helped shape the modern presidency's relationship with the public. This approach to public communication has been adopted and adapted by subsequent presidents. The emphasis on direct communication with the public that Nixon pioneered has evolved with technology. From Ronald Reagan's mastery of television to Donald Trump's use of social media, presidents have continued to seek ways to bypass traditional media and speak directly to voters. Nixon's creation of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, centralized power over the federal bureaucracy in the White House. This reorganization of the executive branch increased presidential control over policy implementation and budget priorities. The legacy of the OMB and Nixon's broader efforts to centralize executive power continue to shape debates about presidential authority and the structure of the federal government. The tension between executive control and bureaucratic independence remains a key issue in discussions of governance. Nixon's madman theory of foreign policy, which involved projecting an image of unpredictability to intimidate adversaries, introduced a new element of psychological warfare into international relations. This approach has been both criticized and emulated by subsequent leaders. The concept of strategic unpredictability in foreign policy, as exemplified by Nixon's madman theory, continues to be debated in foreign policy circles. It raises questions about the balance between deterrence and diplomacy in international relations. Nixon's presidency saw significant shifts in U.S. policy towards Native American tribes. His support for tribal self-determination marked a departure from previous assimilationist policies and set the stage for a new era in federal tribal relations. The legacy of Nixon's Native American policies can be seen in ongoing debates about tribal sovereignty and the federal government's responsibilities to Native American communities. These issues continue to be central to discussions about justice and equality in American society. Nixon's approach to healthcare reform, including his proposal for a form of universal health coverage, demonstrated his willingness to consider traditionally liberal policies. Although his plans were not fully realized, they influenced subsequent debates about healthcare in the United States. The complex history of healthcare reform efforts, dating back to Nixon's presidency, highlights the long-standing challenges of addressing healthcare access and affordability in the U.S. These debates continue to be a central feature of American political discourse. The creation of the Special Action Office for Drug Abuse Prevention under Nixon marked the beginning of a more comprehensive approach to substance abuse issues. This initiative laid the groundwork for future federal efforts to address drug addiction as a public health concern. The evolution of drug policy since Nixon's time reflects ongoing debates about the balance between law enforcement and public health approaches to substance abuse. These discussions continue to shape policy decisions at both the federal and state levels. Nixon's Philadelphia Plan mandated affirmative action in the construction industry, setting a precedent for similar policies in other sectors. This approach to addressing racial inequality in employment has been both praised and criticized, influencing ongoing debates about equity and opportunity. The legacy of affirmative action policies initiated under Nixon continues to be a contentious issue in American politics and law. Debates about the role of race in education and employment reflect the ongoing challenges of addressing historical inequalities. Nixon's creation of the Council on Environmental Quality institutionalized environmental considerations in federal decision-making. This approach to integrating environmental concerns into policy has had lasting effects on government operations and environmental protection efforts. The legacy of Nixon's environmental initiatives can be seen in ongoing debates about the balance between environmental protection and economic development. These discussions continue to shape policy decisions at all levels of government. Nixon's approach to welfare reform, including his proposal for a guaranteed minimum income, represented a significant shift in thinking about poverty alleviation. Although not fully implemented, these ideas have continued to influence debates about social policy. The concept of a guaranteed minimum income, first seriously proposed at the federal level by Nixon, has seen renewed interest in recent years. Debates about universal basic income and other forms of economic support reflect the ongoing relevance of Nixon-era policy discussions. The Vietnamization policy in the Vietnam War, which aimed to gradually transfer military responsibilities to South Vietnamese forces, introduced a new approach to ending U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts. This strategy has influenced subsequent debates about military interventions and exit strategies. The challenges and controversies surrounding Nixon's Vietnamization policy continue to inform discussions about U.S. military engagements abroad. Questions about how to responsibly withdraw from conflicts while supporting allies remain relevant in contemporary foreign policy debates. Nixon's use of executive privilege, particularly during the Watergate investigation, set important precedents for the scope and limits of presidential power. His assertions of executive privilege have influenced subsequent legal and political battles over the extent of presidential immunity. The legacy of Nixon's claims of executive privilege can be seen in ongoing debates about presidential accountability and the balance of powers between branches of government. These issues continue to be tested in courts and political arenas. The creation of the Office of Telecommunications Policy under Nixon centralized control over communications policy in the White House. This move had lasting implications for the regulation of emerging technologies and media. The approach to telecommunications policy initiated under Nixon continues to influence debates about internet regulation, media ownership, and the role of technology in society. These issues remain central to discussions about free speech and democratic participation in the digital age. Nixon's new economic policy, which included wage and price controls, marked a significant government intervention in the economy. This approach challenged traditional notions of free market economics and set precedents for future economic interventions. The legacy of Nixon's economic interventions can be seen in ongoing debates about the proper role of government in managing the economy. These discussions continue to shape policy responses to economic crises and challenges. Nixon's approach to Supreme Court nominations, including his appointment of conservative justices, had a lasting impact on the ideological makeup of the court. His strategy of using judicial appointments to advance political goals has been emulated by subsequent presidents. The politicization of the Supreme Court nomination process, which intensified under Nixon, continues to be a contentious issue in American politics. Debates about the role of ideology in judicial selection reflect the ongoing impact of Nixon's approach. The creation of the Office of Consumer Affairs under Nixon institutionalized consumer protection at the federal level. This initiative laid the groundwork for future consumer protection efforts and regulations. The legacy of Nixon's consumer protection initiatives can be seen in ongoing debates about corporate responsibility and consumer rights. These issues continue to shape discussions about the role of government in regulating business practices. Nixon's Operation Intercept, which increased border security measures with Mexico, set a precedent for future border control policies. This approach to border security has had lasting implications for US-Mexico relations and immigration policy. The legacy of Nixon's border control initiatives can be seen in ongoing debates about immigration, border security, and US-Mexico relations. These issues remain central to political discussions and policy decisions. Nixon's use of presidential signing statements to interpret legislation as he signed it into law expanded the practice of executive interpretation of laws. This approach has been adopted and expanded by subsequent presidents, raising questions about the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. The increased use of signing statements since Nixon's time has led to ongoing debates about the president's role in interpreting and implementing laws. These discussions reflect broader concerns about executive power and the separation of powers. The creation of the Council on International Economic Policy under Nixon centralized control over international economic affairs in the White House. This move had lasting implications for US trade policy and economic diplomacy. The approach to international economic policy initiated under Nixon continues to influence debates about globalization, trade agreements, and economic competition. These issues remain central to discussions about US economic interests in a global context. Nixon's Revenue Sharing Program, which provided federal funds directly to state and local governments, represented a new approach to federalism. This policy had lasting effects on the relationship between different levels of government. The legacy of Nixon's revenue sharing can be seen in ongoing debates about federal funding for state and local programs. These discussions continue to shape policy decisions about the distribution of resources and responsibilities across levels of government. The creation of the Office of Minority Business Enterprise under Nixon institutionalized support for minority-owned businesses at the federal level. This initiative laid the groundwork for future efforts to promote diversity in business ownership. The legacy of Nixon's minority business initiatives can be seen in ongoing debates about economic opportunity and racial equity. These issues continue to shape discussions about entrepreneurship and economic development. Nixon's approach to energy policy, including his creation of the Department of Energy, centralized control over energy-related issues in the federal government. This move had lasting implications for US energy policy and environmental regulation. The energy policies initiated under Nixon continue to influence debates about energy independence, renewable resources, and climate change. These discussions remain central to contemporary political and environmental discourse. Nixon's use of wage and price controls as part of his economic policy represented a significant intervention in the free market. This approach challenged traditional conservative economic principles and set a precedent for government involvement in economic management. The debate over government intervention in the economy, which intensified during Nixon's presidency, continues to be a central issue in American politics. The tension between free market principles and government regulation remains a key point of contention in economic policy discussions. Nixon's efforts to reform the US Postal Service, including signing the Postal Reorganization Act of 1970, had long-lasting effects on this vital institution. The reorganization of the Postal Service as a semi-independent agency continues to influence debates about its role and funding. The ongoing discussions about the future of the US Postal Service, including debates about privatization and modernization, can be traced back to the reforms initiated under Nixon. These issues remain relevant in contemporary political discourse. Nixon's approach to civil service reform, including his efforts to make the federal workforce more responsive to presidential priorities, had significant implications for the structure of government. These changes continue to shape debates about the balance between political appointees and career civil servants. The tension between political control and bureaucratic independence in the federal government, which was highlighted during Nixon's presidency, remains a key issue in discussions about effective governance and democratic accountability. The changes Nixon brought to American politics continue to shape our political discourse and governance structures today. His legacy serves as a reminder of the complex and often contradictory nature of political leadership, the lasting impact of policy decisions, and the ongoing evolution of American democracy. As we continue to grapple with many of the issues that defined Nixon's era, his presidency remains a crucial reference point for understanding the development of modern American politics.